Hi, this is Derek at Boise Cylinder Head Services. This is our 10th episode, live episode today. And we're excited to be here, excited to be doing this again. We missed a week due to technical difficulties. One of the things we wanted to talk about today was burnt valves and how that happens and what that looks like. So I'm going to show you a couple different burnt valves here. Some that are pretty extreme and some that are kind of mild, but all of them will cause a misfire. But once you get to when misfire, you got a check engine light on, your car's running inefficiently. You got a lot of drag on the motor from that one cylinder not firing properly. We'll talk about a couple different reasons, causes for that. Over time, your engine obviously wears down, being ran for a long period of time. But there's a couple other factors, and over time, these things start to come out. So this is a burnt valve. This is an extreme version of a burnt valve, where the guide clearance is really loose and the valve to seat contact isn't transferring enough heat from the head of the valve or the valve in general to relieve it enough. And then as that heat goes and the flames keep blowing by it, it starts to tear a little hole through, melts it into kind of the lava, melting down that metal into molten metal. And then it slowly just wears in. And over time, it can burn a hole through it like that, which is, almost 25% of the valve. This is something a little more milder. This is like as it just starts out. I don't know if we can see that super clearly. Right there's a couple of lines on the face of that valve. Maybe we can see it in there. But it should be a nice shiny contact area, nice and flat. And you can see those ribs right there that are the start of this burnt valve situation. So again, over time, there's a guide that controls where this thing moves up and down. And there's also the seat contact that sits against this angle of the valve right there. And so over time, this valve goes in and out. Your car runs at 5,000 RPM sometimes, sometimes idles at 1,000. It can go up to 6,000 or more in certain cars. But as that thing goes up and down, it has something pushing the tip here, opening it up and closing it down, and it'll wear against the guide. And over time, it can get really loose. And the guide causes heat transference from the valve to the guide to the cylinder head to the coolant system, and then it gets kind of taken out. The heat gets taken out through the coolant system. So if you have excessive clearance in between the stem right here and the guide that it goes through, the heat's not going to be able to transfer properly, and that'll build up heat in the valve, which will wear down the valve seat, which is the contact area, the sealing area of the combustion chamber. It looks like this on a worn out head. This one didn't have a burnt valve, but this is kind of just an example I can show you here. So this is the extremely burnt valve, and it came out of a head similar to this one. But as you can see, there's a big hole right there that lets your exhaust gas or any gas that's in this cylinder just blow right by and out your exhaust pipe and ports. But over time, this is the valve seat face right here. And when that guide starts to wear out and there's excessive clearance, the heat builds up in the head of the valve and in the valve in general, and that causes the exhaust seat or seat to widen out. And then that also causes it, it's not transferring that heat like it should. And so over time, that heat that's building up there becomes too much. And as the exhaust gases are passing by this valve, as it opens, it starts to melt that little hole in it. And, some people keep on going for a long time with a check engine light and a misfire. That's what causes this big hole right there. But I got a couple examples of cylinder heads that commonly have this problem over time. There's not like a spot where, at 95,000, you're going to have a burnt valve. It's not that specific. So it's pretty good of a range. It all depends on the gas, how hard you're running the engine. if you're towing a lot, that increases the chance of something like this. These are some 3.6 cylinder heads, Chrysler or Jeep. They come out of the Jeep Grand Cherokees, Jeep Wranglers, or Chrysler Town and Country. Those are some of the varieties that these come out of. But it's very common for these to have. Oh, hey, John, how's it going? Good to see you here. Just talking about these 3.6 Chrysler heads that we've been seeing a heck of a lot of recently. Yeah, burnt valves. Burnt valves is what we're talking about. This thing on the left-hand cylinder heads, it tends to burn this exhaust valve right here on the front right of the cylinder head. Yeah. But it's a pretty common issue, common enough that we stock these in our shop ready to go for customers that come in with a misfire. We know exactly usually what cylinder it is. I mean, we've seen it on a couple other cylinders, and why it changes to other cylinders, I'm not sure. Those ones probably just wear out faster, but it's really common to see it on the left-hand head front cylinder. Another job that we have in here right now with a burnt valve is the 4.2 GM out of what does this thing come out of? Trailblazer, Chevy Trailblazer. This is a giant head, straight six, huge friggin' thing. But this is your straight six 4.2 GM Trailblazer head. And when we took this head apart, we had two that were burnt pretty significantly. Those were the other two valves I was showing you guys with a little bit of wear. But on this one, the guides are pretty well shot. You can put this valve in here, and there's an excessive amount of wiggle front to back right there, which means you got, instead of 1 or 2 thousandths guide clearance, you probably got like 3 to 5, and that is well above where it needs to be. But on this one, and we've seen this in the past, we've seen these cylinder heads with burnt valves in the past, and it's never been as bad as this one. This one had about, out of 5 cylinders, we had 4, well, out of 6 cylinders, we had 5 burnt valves, and some that were like right on the edge of going. GT45 turbo. Yeah, that would help things out, if you want to burn valves quicker. How's your build going, man? I haven't talked to you in a while. But yeah, we got the 3.2s out of the Jeep Cherokee Trailblazer, Trailhawk. That's what it is, Trailhawk. We've been seeing more of those recently, which is pretty much the same design, 3.2 liter, so it's a little bit smaller, but it has the same valves, different intake size valves, but I mean, pretty much the same concept. What else we got going? So the first valve that I showed you, this one right here with the big old hole in it, that came out of a 2016 WRX STI belt driven 2.5, and I mean they were probably driving this thing pretty quick, pretty aggressively, because who wouldn't with a WRX, But they just kept going with this thing. Did you see that, John? Holy crap! These people just kept on going. But I think it had 40 or 50,000 miles on it, and it had a hole that big in the valve. It was freaking crazy. This is taste, right? We've been seeing a lot of burnt valves recently, and a lot of valve issues. I think in the newer cylinder head designs, 2012 and up, it's more common for the valve to fail than it is for the head to fail. Warp or even guide damage is getting rarer and rarer, and we're just seeing the valves take most of the damage over time, which makes rebuilding a little bit easier in certain areas. So that's pretty sweet. See, we haven't seen any burnt valves in the LS yet. Those things can get pretty worn out and not have an issue. One one of the worst guide problems that I think I've ever seen in this business is out of a Harley Davidson, which we got a pair of those here right now. I'll show you one of those. They got really hefty valves, and they don't tend to wear out nearly like these thin valve new things here. Let's see. Yeah. So this is the Harley Davidson head. We've got all cleaned up, with good refurbished valves in it. But you can probably see the wiggle from side to side. Oh yeah. We've been seeing a lot of direct injection heads here with the valve coking. You probably know what valve coking is, right? The junk on the back of the intake valves. Those things build up and drop carbon into the combustion chamber and stuff, and it'll mar up your cylinder. I don't know. They got to figure something out with that because 100,000 miles, those things are going bad quick. Yeah, we got the 2019 5.3 with direct injection. I think we just got rid of that head today. But all these direct injections have that valve coking built up on the back of the intake valves. We were watching a video not too long ago about ways you can clean it on the car. And, I can't remember exactly all the steps to it, but you pretty much just spray this stuff into your intake while it's running, 3,000 or 5,000 RPMs. And then you just spray the whole canister in there, let it sit for a little bit, and then rev it up to like 5,000 RPMs. And that's supposed to knock all that valve coking loose and shoot it down to your exhaust pipe. And it's kind of like that stuff you pour into your coolant system, to plug up coolant problems on the road trip or something like that. It's just like a temporary fix. You might clean out all that junk now, but we did some research and found out that that stuff just gets knocked out and knocked off the intake valves and flies into the combustion chamber, and then messes up your rings, messes up your cylinder walls, can even mess up your valve seat contact. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Over time, brand new, I'm sure those things don't have issues for quite some time, but it doesn't take too long, maybe 50,000, 100,000 to start building up some pretty good valve coking that it's kind of like gooey sandpaper. So when you knock it loose, it just tears things up. But we've been seeing a lot more direct injection stuff. We actually have a couple valves. Let me go grab a couple valves from direct injection where the valves got pretty significantly damaged. Be good if I had a new one to compare it to. I don't know if you can see this that well in there, but it's almost like a 60-degree angle right here instead of a 45. It's not even close. Regular 45 and then a steep 60. But this thing just pounded into the seats on what was it? That was an LS head. I don't remember what year it was off the top of my head, but those things just got trashed. They eroded the outside diameter of these things. They're supposed to be 2 inches wide. They're probably 1.8, so they probably lost 200 thousandths on the outside diameter. And this was at 50,000 miles. This thing was still running. It was out of some Fire Ranger. Yeah, it was a Fire Ranger truck. And, they only did one cylinder head too. It's kind of crazy. No, actually, they did. They did do the second cylinder head. Remember that now. Had the same issues as the other one. It was running just fine though with that kind of valve damage, or to the driver, it was just fine. All the evidence points towards some serious issues, but we got it fixed up right. But yeah, most of these new cars seems like the valves I almost think they intentionally make them weak, so that's the point that fails, because valves are pretty easy to pop out and pop back in, at least in a shop like this. But Yeah, a lot of valve damage. Not so much. We're not changing out seats nearly as much as we used to. They don't pound in like in the Honda B20Bs. Those things, the exhaust seats used to just burn and pound out the seats, and we'd have to replace them. You know, if somebody driving it hard, even their regular replacement seats would just erode, you know, under some load. And so we've had to go up to these Tucker seats that like work for propane or gas or you name it, it works for it. Natural gas even. But once we put those seats in it, that tended to get rid of the problem. But we don't see any of that valve seat damage like we used to, unless you got something like you know, a valve head breaks off or a bolt gets left in the intake or something like that. You know, that kind of damage we see some seats that we have to replace. But I mean, that's usually some crazy damage in the combustion chamber that causes that sort of an issue. Been doing a lot of Subaru heads in the past 2 weeks. Pretty much everything from 97 and up. We've worked on every variety from that year up, pretty much. We got the single overhead cam, non-VVTs, the VVTs, all the turbo varieties, the W25s, which are the has variable valve timing on the intake and exhaust. And then the earlier ones, which just had the variable valve timing with air injection. I think those are like the 08s. We had the even earlier versions without the air injection, and then those 2 liters, which the 2 liters, a lot of people are doing that whole 2.5 swap where they're putting the heads onto the 2.5 block. And there's a couple different ways to achieve the same goal here, but one of the ways is to gut out the combustion chamber and cut out. This isn't a 2 liter, but it'll work for this. So they pretty much take out the bumps here on the inside of the firing ring and trim it all down and make it so that's like the 2.5 combustion chamber. That's one way to get the same volume CCs in that 2025 swap. The other way is there's a company that sells pistons, and I can't remember off the top of my head what company that is, but they sell pistons that don't raise up high enough or the same height in the block. It's kind of recessed a bit more so that it opens up the combustion chamber enough to give the right size combustion chamber. I've heard a couple of people debating whether that if you don't get rid of these bumps on the outside here, it can cause pre-combustion. So like if you were to do the piston swap, and instead of, you know, addressing the cylinder head, there could be some pre-combustion and stuff like that. So we've only sold one of those heads. We had a customer come in asking for those 2 liter heads to be gutted out like that. We had our port and polish guy, Wes King, work us up a demo for that, what that would look like, and he does amazing work. We're hoping to send him a few more of these things to play with. I hear that's where the big power is at, is doing that 2 liter 2.5 swap. Probably haven't done enough research on it, but it's sounding more and more appealing. I guess another thing I want to talk about today, and I think I've brought it up in the past, is cylinder head cracks. That's been somewhat common in the Ford diesel and LS varieties. Like we just got a whole bunch of cores, supposedly good rebuildable cores from the junkyard of these LS heads. There's quite a few different varieties of this puppy, but this thing cracks right in between the valves. And out of 6 heads, we had 4 of them cracked. And the only one that wasn't cracked was kind of surprising because it was the older of the bunch, which in my experience have been more commonly cracked than the newer versions. I think this is like 06. It started in 06, this casting here, but they just always tend to crack right here. We've seen part supply stores and stuff supplying cylinder heads like this, refreshed, cleaned up, new valves, ground, whatever, and they still have the cracks in them. So I don't think, I mean, they're not overly worried about it, but we've seen cracks that get pretty extreme pretty fast. Once they're cracked, it's only going to get worse. So we don't sell that here. But let's see, the Subaru VVT heads, they're cracked. They crack pretty commonly. We've seen, we had those 2-liter turbo heads. You're hard pressed to find a set of heads that isn't cracked of those 02 WRX 2-liter heads. Those things are cracked, and all four of the valves pretty much have a crack right to the spark plug. Which on those heads, I've seen people run those forever, and I've never really seen a problem with those. But they just crack right, and this isn't a great example, but it's pretty much the same combustion chamber. They crack right from the exhaust seat here straight across. And the concern there would be, if that crack grows and grows and grows, it could go underneath the exhaust seat or intake seat and then cause it to dislodge or hit coolant. And then you have coolant in your combustion chamber. And that's going to mess things up. The car's not going to be running efficient, misfires, all sorts of stuff. I haven't seen any cracks on their newer stuff though, like 2014 and up. I haven't seen any of that stuff crack yet. Those things seem to be holding up pretty good. We've seen some at 200,000 miles, and they needed rebuilt, but they weren't. Cylinder heads weren't damaged beyond repair, which is nice to see that these cores are lasting longer. As far as rebuilding them and reusing them goes. We've had like those 3-liter Ford Ranger cylinder heads. It's a very common issue for those things to pound out the exhaust seats. They burn valves too, but I think more commonly the pounded in valve seats. Those cylinder heads there, we were dropping seats into those all the time, but as far as those cylinder heads go, they'd always crack across the coolant port to pretty much the side of the head. It'd just creep off the side of the head, and you'd have a coolant leak that, cast iron's not nearly as easy to weld as aluminum. But those heads just didn't last very long. I ended up having to get new castings for all that stuff. It's kind of crazy with these old Harley Davidson heads. The biggest problem that I've seen with these things is that guide wears out. Everything else seems to hold up just fine. There's just something right there. It didn't run decent since it's from the 80s. You gotta wrap it up then. 7 more minutes. You do got a set of heads in here from 351 Chevy that we're working on. We're seeing less and less of those. At least less and less original heads. Most people are going the aftermarket, aluminum heads or Trick Flow or Summit or Edelbrock. They're buying aftermarket heads like that. So all these old cores and castings are only good for, say, collectors, who collect. You can get the year and the month that a cylinder head's made. And if you got a car that's made that same month, it's real crucial for collectors to keep all the parts and pieces in that year range, especially the block, the cylinder head, rods, stuff like that. To keep the value of a classic car, at its peak. Some people really strive to find all that stuff. We have a couple customers in here who bring us in pretty beat up heads, and they're like, "Is it savable? We need it to be savable. We've been searching for years to find this exact month and year cylinder head." So, other than those guys, we're really not seeing too much of the old cast iron cylinder heads. But see, these ones are actually in good shape, and I think they're not really that old, but 95. These things just look So nice when they're all cleaned up and rebuilt. Nice shiny surface, nice shiny seats. You know, you drop a few new valves in there, or all new valves and new springs, and as cleaned up as it is, this thing really shines, really pops. You know, but most people are changing to those aluminum cylinder heads, which, you know, get a little more flow. I don't know about longevity, but it probably gets a little more than these old cast iron heads. They don't hold nearly as much heat. Alrighty, well, that's all we got for you today. Thanks for watching. It was good to see you, John. If you're still on there, I'll have to hit you up and see what you're up to. Is glad you're here. Thanks for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button and the bell notifications so you get all our notifications for the videos. And remember, it's all in your head.